Are our sharks doing or ingesting cocaine in South Florida?
Cocaine
yes or no?
sharks, yes or no? Well, it's a more complicated answer than just yes or no.
Chris?
Rosie.
Don't know whether to greet you or strategize against you.
Well, I think we're here now understanding that we have a partnership, so I don't think we need to strategize against each other as much as now we're working together. So let's we can change that narrative.
We are reality TV survivors.
Trauma bond, right?
Trauma, deep trauma bond via Netflix. I appreciate them for that because it brought me you. Obviously, you're a scientist, but we both do TV now, which is like a kind of a hard branch to be in because for TV, like we just said, you have to be very entertaining and also like kind of throw things out there that are like very like clickbaity and stuff like that. And it gets difficult to be both a scientist and a TV host.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's an element there of risk, you know, like for Brendan and I, when we came into the show, we saw the contract, it scared the hell out of us. I mean, to be honest. We looked at it and we sent it to some lawyers and they basically said this is the same contract that they send out to people in like The Bachelor, just a blanket reality show sort of contract. And it was scary. And so we had to take a leap of faith ultimately to take the word of the producers who we started to get to know, and they were honest and they stuck to their word, right? That they were going to make this sort of kid friendly and do that. But as a scientist, you're taking decades of building up your scientific credibility, you as a scientist, and you're really taking a big risk in joining something like this, not knowing what the outcome is. I think some of the threats that I saw could be, you know, with AI technology development, that they can, honestly, they have the ability to take out your words and replace them with what they want if you don't say something, or, you know, they can just change the narrative, as you said, however they want. And so those were the things that happen in Shark Week that we see, and we've known, you know, stories that happen to some of our colleagues where it changed the narrative a bit, where it made them not look great.
On that note, there is a very clickbaity TV thing I want to talk to you about, but I think first you should give more of your background. So what exactly do you do? Because when I first met you, I feel like you were the fish guy to me, and now you're the shark guy.
Yeah, man, to tell my story of the last 20 years, to keep it really short, I mean, I'm a Midwesterner. 20 years I've been in science. I'm 20. That started at 1.
Since I was born.
I mean, I'm 42 years old now, right? So since I was in undergraduate in Wisconsin, and I know you're a Midwesterner too, I was just finding every opportunity to do whatever interested me. And I was a kid digging in a pond, looking for frogs, snakes, trying to rescue things, trying to understand the natural world as best I could in my landlocked state. And as I moved, you know, kept considering what my career might be when I got into college and seeing things around me. I mean, I can remember driving down the road and seeing trees cut down, deforesting happening in real time to widen highways. And I'm like, what are the implications of this? Like, we're obviously having an impact. And then that spread into me trying to find all these internships and research experiences in undergrad, ultimately landing me a position at a lab doing fish ecology in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And that's what really sparked my interest in fish ecology and scientific concepts as it was. And that's what got me started in the research direction. And that was when I was 20, 21. So that's why I said I've been at this for about 20 years. And then, you know, the Great Lakes, not that much different physically, at least, from working in the ocean. We're offshore for days at a time, doing deep water work, crazy kinds of stuff that I would have never dreamt as a little kid. And then that gave me the confidence and the scientific knowledge, at least of fish, to go into do more fish work, ultimately marine mammals, which then led into a PhD in Goliath grouper, reef fish ecology, which introduced me to a lot of sharks in those same environments that I was working with Goliath grouper in the Bahamas, in Florida, Gulf of Mexico, Atlantic coasts. And then all at the same time, I didn't even know what Tiger Beach was at the time. I was in the Bahamas, and then I learned every time I got in the water, I'd see tigers and lemons and bull sharks. So around my mid-20s is when I really started to be around sharks regularly and start to think about them as something that I was very interested in. And I think I've just, you know, even when I was doing my PhD work, I was always around sharks. We would catch Goliath grouper and also catch sharks because they're attracted to the same kind of bait. And so in the last 5 years or so is really when I've turn to focus. I'm still doing work on Goliath grouper as a whole, but another reef fish ecology. And but I've really started to turn a lot of my focus towards sharks recently.
So is switching from Goliath grouper to sharks, was there a learning curve for what you needed to know, or was that like an easy transition that you can go to school and focus on Goliath grouper and make that transition and it's easy to do?
I love those sorts of questions because ultimately my background, as I mentioned, started in the Midwest. I've really been question-oriented, driven more than I have species-driven, as much as I love working with the big charismatic megafauna like sharks, Goliath grouper, dolphins, those sorts of things. But my background and my questions are always conservation related, human impacts related, pollution, population ecology, behavior, those sorts of things. And so with that, I can move from one species to the next, right? A lot of the same questions, population dynamics, overfishing, pollutants in the water, how that's affecting the health and the populations of these animals. I can ask that same question with grouper that I can ask with sharks. So that much is the same, learning the anatomy, behavior, ecology of different groups of organisms. That's where you have to spend some time to understand a whole new group of animals before you can ask deeper questions.
That's really interesting. That was actually a very good explanation because that makes perfect sense. But I think that leads us to a bigger question too. So something we hear all the time right now in South Florida is, are sharks around cocaine? Are our sharks doing or ingesting cocaine in South Florida?
Cocaine
yes or no?
Sharks, yes or no? Well, it's a more complicated answer than just yes or no.
Okay.
Are they doing cocaine? No. The reality is animals, aquatic animals in particular, are constantly exposed to pollutants. And in Miami, near shores, near urbanized areas, a lot of these chemicals, whether it be cocaine, other pharmaceutical drugs, other toxicants, other pollutants, mercury, PCBs, all these chemicals in this sort of chemical soup is constantly entering the waterway. And sharks, grouper, reef fish, anything in that environment, seagrass, anything is being exposed to these things on a regular basis. How that's accumulating, how that's affecting them is based on a lot of things, right? It could be the cocaine trade, it could be bales that are coming in and sharks biting them out of curiosity. But I think the larger issue with this is really water treatment centers, sewage, things that are getting into the waterway, things that are being used locally. So something like cocaine is one of those things that is very human related, right? It's a human consumed drug, and yes, when that gets into the waterway or where it's being used in high amounts, there's going to be a higher concentration of that in the water. So maybe around Miami, 2 papers that came out recently about cocaine sharks out of the Bahamas and out of Brazil showed high levels of that. But these are near areas where there's lower water treatment facilities that don't have the same capabilities as maybe some more developed countries, if you will. And so they are really more subjected to these things getting into the water. And that's why we see these things like cocaine sharks. But in reality, it was also caffeine and some of these other drugs that are also entering the waterway at the same time. They're just not as catchy as cocaine.
So I think a big clarifying thing for that is that our sharks aren't doing or intentionally ingesting drugs and cocaine, but that the things that we're doing here on land and the pharmaceuticals and the chemicals that we're using enter the waterways, and then we're finding them in trace amounts. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. It's And
so is it altering their behavior at all too, or is that just kind of like a, because it's being positioned as that?
Yeah. So I mean, well, first of all, there's a sensational concept around cocaine sharks, like Shark Week, right? So it's something that a lot of people are going to see in the news and then be like, this must be happening everywhere. Yeah. A lot of times it's not tested for, right? So that's first and foremost. So like the reason why we've seen this in the news more is because it's being tested more by scientists, right? If you don't test for it, you don't see it. How things like cocaine or these other drugs are impacting their behavior or other parts of their ecology or their populations, a lot of it's just not really well known. I mean, theoretically, it could affect their behavior, their feeding pattern, they might be less threatened in environments where there's predators and be more subjected to predation. They may not be able to feed as regularly. Maybe their energy expenditure goes down. So those are the behavioral concerns. But really long term, it's more of a chronic issue, right? It leads more into the things that all these drugs in this soup are, right? I mean, they're not just exposed to cocaine in these environments. It's indicative of all the stuff. There could be thousands of chemicals they're being subjected to, and all of that together is accumulated in their tissues. It's going to long term affect their kidneys, their liver, their heart health, and that can then in turn, as we look at population dynamics, ultimately impact their populations.
So is there any sort of technology or anything we're looking into to reduce the amount of pharmaceuticals and chemicals in the water to reduce the impacts? Or is it more of just, again, water treatment plants and...
Man, with pharmaceuticals in particular, they are what are considered, a contaminant of emerging concern, which means they're just now being looked into. Again, like technological advances as we develop the tools to test for these things, to screen for hundreds of different pharmaceutical compounds. That's what we're really at right now. Water treatment centers are really where that technology is going to live, because these are being ingested, and Florida's like an epicenter for drug use from a pharmaceutical standpoint. We have an elderly population here, antidepressants, arrhythmic medication for your heart. There's a lot of these things that we see in these animals that are probably very indicative of the population in Florida in particular. But it's really reducing these things probably being overused, getting into the systems, and then our water treatment facilities, you have to kind of turn the faucet off and clean it up at the same time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's basically we're just taking it day by day right now?
Well, I mean, there are regulations, management of these things. We have done a really good job in the past. We know mercury is a problem. We know DDT has been a problem historically, right? And once we can kind of grasp what some of the sort of like, the tap is for some of these things, how it's getting into the environment, what the effects are, that's where science really leads into management and policy changes, right? And so once you can kind of understand these things better, that's where, it's not just, I mean, maybe it's taking it day to day to some extent, but really it's about making those changes based on what science tells us is happening in the environment. And we also know a lot of these things are, pharmaceuticals aside, they're maybe a little bit more volatile in the environment, don't last as long, but heavy metals and, these pollutants that last in the environment for a very long period of time, they're really not going anywhere. They kind of cycle in the environment and come back in different forms, so that you can have something like mercury in some of the most remote lake systems in the world, right?
I think you brought up something interesting about like science and policy as well. Obviously right now, South Florida is a hub for human-wildlife conflict with sharks. I think it's the second highest next to Australia for human-wildlife conflict with sharks here. And the number one thing I hear is that we have too many sharks here in Florida. What do you think about that?
Too many sharks in Florida. Man, when you, depending on what stakeholder group you listen to here, as there are many, we got the fishing groups, we got the dive groups, we've got scientists, which are unfortunately just considered another stakeholder group. You've got people that have varying angles on this, right, of what it means to have too many of anything. And let me break this down in a very simple way. Have you ever heard of what's called the shifting baseline syndrome?
Yeah.
So we talk about this all the time because this feeds into this exactly. I've seen this with Goliath grouper, copy and paste into sharks now.
Yeah.
It's really people getting loud about something that's probably always been there or is changing. So with that, we basically are passing every generation with a new norm, a new baseline, right? So what we are seeing as the new norm environmentally is not what our grandparents saw.
Right.
So
I always explain it as like 100 years ago, if your grandpa went fishing, it might have been normal for him to see 100 sharks around the boat.
Right.
But then if you go fishing as a kid and all of a sudden 30 years later, you see 50 sharks a day. If you all of a sudden start seeing 100 sharks back to the normal baseline, you think the population's exploding. But really, that's actually just back to like the healthy, normal baseline from things being overfished. I see it with crocodiles down here too. Now that the American crocodile population is kind of exploding back to like normal levels. Like people went from never seeing an American crocodile to start seeing them in their backyards, and they're freaking out.
Right, and that's where it really comes into the storytelling aspect or education. You need to flip that narrative into a positive conservation success, because with the shifting baseline syndrome, what you're really seeing is a degraded environment from generation to generation and lower conservation standards because of that as an effect. And so when you have these, especially native populations rebounding. So with sharks, again, we've done a really good job in Florida, honestly, and federally of managing fisheries in the state, and that's why you've seen some stabilization of populations that were on a very strong decline, and you've seen some increases in abundance. And so that is fact. I mean, that is what science has shown. But to what level they become a problem, that's where you get all these like strong emotional sides of things. And so back to the shifting baseline syndrome, we really base what we know on science and data collection, right? More than just emotion. And that's where the two conflict. Sharks are not overabundant, right? Goliath group are not overabundant. They're making a comeback. And that gets conflated but in some groups saying they're way overpopulated. But that's not based on science. That's based on opinion and based on people feeling threatened in their day-to-day. It's also
kind of, I feel like, almost like tragedy of the commons is, like you said, like we have people trying to use the ocean for different activities, and we're seeing a lot of conflict because obviously shark divers or shark researchers, we want sharks.
Yes.
But if you're fishing, you probably don't want a shark because your catch is going to get depredated. So.
In a direct sense, yes. Fishers do want sharks because they mean healthy ecosystems, but what the group that's complaining about sharks and depredation are experiencing is real. I'm not saying it's not real. An anecdote can sometimes be a negative term for a lot of these groups. And we listen to all of them because ultimately what FWC, the conservationists, are doing is listening to the different stakeholders, taking science into account. In the perfect world, this is what they're doing. And then they're using that to inform management and make decisions. And so, when you're getting into these different areas of conflict, it's really important to base statements on science and fact.
Right.
And that's my job.
Well, obviously we've been doing some stuff together.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to go out and tag sharks with you guys. And there's so many cute little kids that love everything that you guys are doing. But like, what's the overall goal?
Yeah, and you got to meet a lot of those kids, and some are adorable, from 9 years old on up to teachers on the verge of retirement. We've really worked with a lot of people across the gamut. Well, first of all, yes. So SharkDocs was the name that we had on the show, and I think the main benefit that we got from the show, is we use that as a marketing tool for launching our organization. Me and Dr. Brennan Tallware, who's currently at Scripps University. So we co-founded this together, and we've launched it really in a direct sense to work more towards, in a creative angle, more towards healthy oceans, right? That's probably our driving theme in our own way. We want to see healthy populations of animals, especially sharks, but that doesn't just, it doesn't mean only sharks. A lot of my background, as we've discussed today, is in reef fish ecology and other things too. But right now our focus is on sharks. Creating healthy, happy people. So we also want to be able to educate and storytell and bring people into, especially the conservation space, to give them tools to use to go out and do things in everyday life, right? So we're building up a whole series of like citizen scientists in our programs. That's where we've worked a lot together in SeaKeepers and you personally. And we really want people to understand that they can have big impacts now in the conservation space, and they don't have to become PhDs in this world, right? So that's really a driving factor. So what we're leaning into right now is running field courses in a very creative way. We want to expose people to all the vastness of incredible ecosystems that Florida has. I mean, we have the Everglades here. We have one of the highest per capita nesting sea turtles beaches in the world, really. We have the Gulf Stream right off the coast here in the Atlantic, which has thriving populations of sharks and rays and sea turtles and fish and all these things. And we want to give people tools that they can use everyday life, learning fish identification, learning shark identification, coming out with us to participate in our research project so they can actually see how scientists operate in the real world, right? A lot of these people that have come out with us, as you know, that was their first time ever seeing a shark. That was their first time ever being in the water with a shark.
Yeah, that was really cool. And I also like that you guys specifically basically like tap them in as scientists for the day. Like they're legitimately doing the shark tagging. They're doing everything.
Yeah.
Like they are hands-on, they're doing the tail rope, they're like securing the shark, they're helping collect the samples. It's like they actually get the opportunity to be a scientist for the day. And I think it's a good opportunity too for students to like figure out if that's genuinely the path they want to take for school, and if it's like a long-term thing for them, or if they try it once and they're like, wow, that was a hard day. Because I mean, it is a lot of work sometimes. It's like a lot of physical and mental work.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of planning that goes into this that they get to experience some of the field work. Yeah, I mean, we're not working long days like we normally would in the field either, mind you, but we're working in the heat. We're working in potentially conditions. It's the heat. It ain't so much the humidity, it's the gosh darn heat.
It got me. I looked like
from Wisconsin. Yeah. Oh, you were. Yeah,
I was so burnt, and I put sunscreen on, I swear.
Well, and dehydration's a real thing. Heat exposure is a real thing. And so people, yes, they get to experience that. A lot of those students may continue to try to pursue graduate careers, and we had a really nice discussion towards the end. We always try to include so people can ask questions about the career in this space. But also, like, people are coming from a different angle. Yeah, like the 9-year-old, maybe this just inspired her to think more critically, or the teacher who may retire and then go in to do something with her career after that.
We even had an artist.
We had an artist.
Yeah.
And we have the next one we're running that you'll be there for is working with teachers, specifically teacher groups, where the whole point is that they can learn about research and take pieces of that back into the classroom to create curriculum. And that's why citizen science is such an important piece of this, because anybody can do this.
Right, and they can go back and they can teach their classes, they can do some hands-on activities, and it gets everybody involved in science too, so that's really cool.
Yeah, like reef surveys, we spent a lot of time on that, teaching those techniques, which is called the roving diver survey, which on a normal dive, if you can identify fish species, you can record them, upload them into a citizen science database for reef, and then anybody can access those data. I published with those data during my PhD, right? So I knew the importance of the citizen science data.
Yeah, crowdsourced data is amazing.
It's huge.
I think that's great, and I'm really proud of you guys for starting that.
Thank you. Yeah, we still are kind of figuring out where this is going to take us. We have other broader conservation, comprehensive ideas, but leaning into the education space is our starting point.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you for joining me, or I should say, you're welcome.
Yes, I figured there was some sarcasm in it.
For letting you join me.
Thank you for having me. What's cool is I've been now working with SeaKeepers for about 4+ years, from Goliath grouper work, in water diving. It's a lot of logistical stuff to get boats, to get research, to logistics taken care of, to get teams built. And, SeaKeepers has been a great organization to help lead a lot of that. As scientists, we don't have a lot of money, right? So we don't.
We have $5
yeah, so we're all the time being resourceful with, how we're getting these things done. So to have access to vessels and people that want to help with these things, it's game changer. It's a game changer.
It's definitely very, very helpful.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Dr. Chris Malinowski, and if you'd like to learn more about SharkDocs and our work, visit sharkdocs.org. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to explore the first 2 seasons of Voyages of Discovery by visiting SeaKeepers.org. And don't miss the next episode, where SeaKeeper sits down with Dr. Colin Ford, marine biologist, filmmaker, and co-founder of Coral Morphologic, to explore Miami's incredible coral ecosystems, why they're more important than ever, and the groundbreaking work happening right here in our own backyard. We'll see you next time on Voyages of Discovery.